Okay. So welcome to this talk today, which is concluding an late winter, early spring series of lectures and discussions about architecture, technology, and how we are moving forward. I'm really glad to be able to welcome Lynn Osmond from the Chicago Architecture Center, William Murray, Director and founding partner of Wordsearch Place, and Hossein Rezai-Jorabi, Director or Design Director, Web Structures, which is important, Global Design Director. We're going to miss out. We should have had Kent Martinussen from the Danish Architecture Center. Unfortunately, with technology, he's not able to attend. There's something happened to his computer at home, and now he's too far away to drive into our studio and sit with me here, which is also a part of the story. But we're going to talk about what COVID or this situation have done to us, and for us as architects, and engineers, and urbanists and landscapers, it seems to that something is happening, which is more than just getting over the pandemic, get vaccinated, and move on. Until recently, I did not personally believe that it would have any impact on us, but I have to recognize that something is happening here. We know that some of the biggest changes in architecture and planning comes from major shift in health situation. Cholera is one of them, but also mobility and technology. Whole industrialization was a big move, moving people from the countryside to the cities. Right now, there seems to be at least in this situation now, an unholy relation between, or kind of marriage between, technology and pandemic in a way, because we couldn't do this today at all without all this technology being put in place and developed to this level. Just think about that there's just a survey came out recently from McKinsey saying that 20 to 25% of all workers will work remotely 3 to 5 days per week moving forward in all the developed countries, and even manufacturing companies are able to work remotely with help from tech and robotics. It's a complete shift. I personally, as a young architect in this studio, could never imagine to have stayed home and worked. It would have been seen a bit dodgy, or you're kind of not doing what you should do. And today it's totally normal. So what is the new normal here? Think about that a studio as us, Henning Larsen, delivering the design for the new business school at ADI, had as a major feature a big atrium, was kind of really designed for people to meet and have touchdown and workspaces in it, and it's been completely empty. And suddenly the whole some data behind that project is a little bit out in the dark, and we just have to rethink what that means. So we did a post-occupancy study of it, and when it started, Corona started, and we've seen is that there's no. There's of course a choice that's been given back to people by being able to work at home, and just think about that. A few years ago, it was a privilege of the few, maybe the managing director, or if you were a writer or a thinker, you could work at home, but otherwise you had to do it in together with somebody else. Think about globalization is more a digital mindset than it's a physical reality as it goes right now. And I can't help to think that it all started before the pandemic. This was kind of a trend that we recognized as being some front runners in organic food and work-life balance, which of course with this pandemic just seems to be, if not right, so at least showing opportunities that can be followed. So for me to see it's like the fourth revolution could be a revolution, like a real one, but it could also end up being a return to life we left behind. And I'm not saying this to be romantic. I'm just saying that in a way we talked about in the studio some days ago that people love to go to these small coffee shops in different places and not buy their coffee at Starbucks. And the whole logic behind that, like if you want to go to hotels, the small hotel and stuff like that, it seems to be part of the same thing. So as designers and thinkers in this field, also with the engineering part, it's really a new responsibility that's put on us. And one of the things that's very clear is that the design excellence, per se in architecture or planning or urbanism, is just a component, a part of the bigger perspective. So now, that was just my introduction. I would like to ask you to each of the panelists to give an introduction of themselves more in depth, but also talk about how they look at this. And we haven't been coordinating the thoughts here, so the idea was also that we get it fresh. So for the whole Henning, Larsen and Ramble organization, our guest, we want to learn from your insights from different parts of the world and from different positions of where you work and act on a daily basis. So William, would you start, please? Can you, yeah. You need to put your mic on. No, you're still muted.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. So you see, look, technology, we've seen that already Kent can't turn up, even though he's in Copenhagen. I for the first time, thought I'd used every single piece of software, has over the last year have discovered that my computer won't do this one, GoToWebinar. My name is William Murray. I'm a director and founding partner of Wordsearch Place, as it says up there. I'm a kind of a real estate strategist. I spent 20 years in communications and marketing until I got so fed up with how many crappy developments were being made by developers around the world and how many opportunities were being missed in the creation of them. I stopped doing that and set up Wordsearch Place. And really, we say to people that our goal is to stop developers making crappy places, and that's our goal. We've talked about the impact of lockdown and how it might affect us, and I just point to my own personal experience. That's me on the left pre-lockdown, and on the right that's me now. And I think we can all see that it's taken a pretty heavy toll over time. Now, admittedly, the one on the left is 15 years pre-lockdown, but I think that, I don't know about you, but I'm experiencing an atrophying of my normal functions. I've recognized that sometimes I feel less fluent. My mood has gone up and down on day to day. And I was talking to a friend of mine who described it as a sort of cultural or emotional scurvy. That I'm missing the vitamin C of culture and of community, and that we're missing people, and we're missing that real proper engagement that we're used to. And I think we've all talked over the last year about social distancing, and it's not social distancing that we've been doing. We've been craving social engagement. I've been craving it hugely. I mean, I start this talk off with a joke, right? I have no idea whether the 500 people at the end of this call think it's funny or stupid, because I'm sitting here talking to myself in my room. And what we've been doing is physical distancing, and we've really been missing the social side of it. And I think it's really important to remember, and I think as an industry, next slide please, as an industry, we forget that we are hairless apes. Some of us less hairless than others, admittedly, but we're hairless apes, right? We are social animals, and we crave the social far more than we crave the architectural. And I think that I'll be careful, knowing that this is a big design audience, and I have a love-hate relationship with architecture. My father was an architect but never practiced, ran the London Architecture Centre, worked with Lynn in Chicago. I spent my whole life in architecture. I studied at a school of architecture, worked in it, but I love this cartoon by Louis Hellman, the great cartoonist, about the image of the architect. And as you can see from the top left, they're seen by the public up on in their cloud, up in the sky, distant, by the client sitting there not doing anything, being lazy, by the quantity surveyor throwing money away, by the planners, stamping on historic cities and drawing them out, by the builder, a kind of a fey aesthete. But critically, the architect is seen by himself holding the torch, taking people into the promised land. And I think that's taking people into the promised land. And I think that whilst architecture has the power to do incredible good, we have to recognize what its important goals are and the things that can restrict it. And next slide, I think one of those things is because, quite reasonably, architectural education focuses on this, on the physical, on the building. And of course, it's critical that you do so because what you're creating is so difficult. But the danger is that we can lose sight of the social. We can lose sight of the person at the heart of all of these components. And I think that if anything we've learned over lockdown is how much more important that is. And the thing that I hope that the thing that we never lose sight of is the fact that our lives are so important to this. Now, what I also hope is that we look at COVID, next slide, like a sort of beneficial forest fire. And I think if you think, forest fires go through nature and they burn out the dead wood, they get rid of the waste, and what comes up from them are fresh, new growths, the things that regenerate societies. And I think if we look at some of the unforeseen circumstances of historic crises, amazing things can come out of them. Next slide, please. And one of the unforeseen circumstances of the First World War was that women around the world got the vote, because suddenly they realized that the power they had in society. We didn't think that would come out of the First World War, but that's what happened. And after the Second World War in the UK, next slide, please, the unforeseen circumstance was the creation of the NHS, which is arguably the greatest thing that Britain has ever done. It's 50 years, 72 years this year, something incredibly extraordinary that came out of people's decision that they weren't going to go back to the way they were. So I hope that what we do now is we ask ourselves, next slide, what is it about work that we didn't like, that we want to change? What is it about our lives that we need to improve upon? What should we be thinking about leisure and about family? I, for one, never want to go back to a point where we think that people's work is more important than their family. That we've all recognized the value of those relationships and how important they are to us. But what should we be thinking about? Health and well-being, about community and cities and climate and those big issues that now we have an opportunity to change. Inclusion, whether capitalism is still fit for purpose. What does democracy mean in addressing some of those big issues that we need to deal with? And I think that really comes down to one simple thing, us evaluating and understanding what we value. Next slide, please. And understanding that value is a thing that we have come to lose sight of over the last 70 years. I was listening to Mark Carney, the ex-governor of the Bank of England, Canadian economist, talking at the BBC Reith Lectures this Christmas, and he said the extraordinary thing is that we have no way of making monetary value, attaching monetary value to the Amazon until we cut it down. Right? The only point at which we can add a value to the Amazon is when we destroy it, turn it into a kind of resource to be used, and that doesn't seem right. So we need to work out, what do we value about our lives? What do we value about society, about other people, about the planet as we move forward? And we should think about change. And change is incredibly hard. Next slide, please. And first, it means we have to accept the need for change, and we have to embrace what that means, and we have to manage it. It's all very well, and I think that I spend my life trying to talk to developers, work on projects where we have to embrace a new way of doing things, and change is incredibly hard. And it has to be thought of as an active process where we manage it and adapt to it. And I think that it comes down to a kind of really simple idea, which is the opportunity of serendipity. Next slide, please. Serendipity is the unexpected good luck resulting from unplanned moments in which proactive decisions lead to positive outcomes. And it's actually the thing that we all miss from the office. It's all the thing we miss from the city. It's bumping into things, seeing people, gathering stimulus, those meetings that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been getting a coffee or standing by the water cooler, that really makes amazing things happen. And we should think about COVID being that opportunity for serendipity. And my final thought before I hand over, and I think I went way over my 3 minutes, so I apologize, is that remember, the future is created by architects and developers. And next slide, please. This is a clip from one of the Marvel movies. I think you'll recognize this is the Stark Tower in the middle of New York City. That building, the symbol of the future of New York City, was not built by Tony Stark, right? That was built by a developer, probably, maybe speculatively, or else it was a build to suit. but it was a developer who saw the opportunity in the future, who got a team of architects, who got a team of real estate professionals to go and model what the future is. And if we're going to do it in a way that we want it to support us all, we need to start planning for that change now. Thanks.
Fantastic. Lynn, please.
Well, great. If I could have the next slide, please. I'm Lynn Osmond, and President and CEO of the Chicago Architecture Center, and we are the largest architectural organization in the world that is all about translating architecture and design for the general public. And we do it through our tours. You probably, if you've been to Chicago, you've been on the Architectural River Cruise. We have these wonderful quadro docents that translate the subject for the public. We also do excellent programs, and actually we were supposed to have Louis come and speak, and then all of a sudden a pandemic hit. So we are going to get you there. And then we've had William come in. I work a lot with his father on the Association of Architecture Organizations, which we founded 10 years ago. And we have robust education programs. And of course, we have Open House Chicago, which we took away from London with Victoria Thornton and started it 10 years ago, and it's now reaching over 100,000 people per year. So I'm really thrilled to be here today. Next. So, you know, what's really happened is that COVID has changed the way we live, we work, we shop. In many ways, our lives are much smaller because we really live in our very condensed neighborhoods. But, you know, they're also much broader because just think of this. We're on this Zoom call, just a flip of the switch, except for everybody but Kent this morning. We're instantly connected with our colleagues in Singapore and Denmark, in London, and it's just, that's a real novel opportunity. Next. But as William referred to, our homes have become our offices, and there's this blurred line between them. And the pandemic has proven that we can work anywhere in the world and in any setting. But, you know, what does that mean for the design industry, the future of the office, the future of our cities? And will we ever return to the way it was? And I just don't think that's going to happen. Next. Louis referred to a recent McKinsey study on the future of work, which said as many 25% of the overall workforce could shift to remote work post-pandemic in some sort of a hybrid model between 2 or 3 days at work, 2 or 3 days at home. And some industries which don't require physical proximity are going to be really affected, whereas industries like healthcare, of course, is not going to change that much. But then this is interesting because a recent survey of 278 executives said they're planning on reducing their office space by 30%. So that's really going to affect the way our cities work. You know, it's going to affect the restaurants that support our lunch crowds, the retail, the public transit. Next. But automation and AI are also going to further impact us, so that whether it be construction or whether it be automation on the manufacturing floor, that's also going to change. So what's this need for retraining a whole generation or people mid-career to have new careers? And so we're going to see that shift happening soon. So next. Then we've also got the acceptance of the virtual meeting. Is that we just see it, that's the way it is, that we're just happy to do the virtual meeting, and that's going to affect the convention industry. We're expecting a 20% decrease in business travel. Is going to affect all the hospitality, the airlines. Next. And then this pandemic has resulted in 3/4 of people using digital channels for the first time during the pandemic to, you know, that's going to affect our storefronts. What's going to happen with retail? We have really depended on retail to activate our streets. So how's that going to look differently as we go forward? Next. And all of this says that designers have to rethink the office, the hospitality, the retail experience, and just the city as a whole. We've become much more localized in our daily lives, and this is an opportunity to encourage a walkable, safe, and stimulating public realm that is integral to the concept of the 15-minute city. Next. So this is actually a picture of my local park, which has become really where I live and play, you know, whether it be walking the dog, whether it be socializing, but this is the hub. And I think we're seeing more of this. And, you know, so that when we look at American cities anyway, and I'm assuming that cities everywhere, is that there's a need for planners and designers to really think about the growth of satellite job hubs and self-sustaining communities. So this is where, you know, for the past year, I've been living, I've been working, I've been playing, I've been shopping. And so downtowns are really thinking about how do you kind of shift away from this monoculture. And I think Chicago's been doing it for the last 20 years, where we really have a good transition between, you know, all the uses of a city. So the work and the play happening in our downtown core. And that really makes for healthy neighborhoods. Next. Then we also will see this whole transition towards what's happening with buildings and the adaptive reuse of older office structures. This Tribune Tower, iconic building in Chicago, is actually being made into residential. And then the New York Times had an article just this week that talked about the shortening of the life cycle of buildings and the need for buildings to be designed so they can have multiple lives, because the cycle is for change is so much shorter than what we experienced before. And then separately, when we look at some of our downtown cores, you know, the Tribune is on the Magnificent Mile here in Chicago, which is our premier shopping street. You know, there's going to be less flagship retail, and we're seeing you know, some large stores on Magnet Mile go out of business or take away, like such as Macy's. And the, you know, theory about what's going to replace them is going to be something that is more about the experience economy. So retail will have to change. Next. And then newer Class A office space is still going to be in demand, but it's really going to be made around the new healthy building standards that are going to be what people are going to want going forward. Next. So, you know, the theory could be that smaller and mid-sized cities may be the big winners post-COVID, because people can live anywhere. And so they're going to be looking for places that have a work-life balance, if one that can exist, as William was saying. And they're going to be looking at what is the cost of living. So Chicago's fortunate because it's not an expensive city compared to most of the other global cities. So I hope that we'll be well positioned going forward. And you know, what we're really looking at, though, is how do we make an inclusive, affordable city? So in conclusion, this pandemic has really caused a seismic disruption for what is calling for designers to rethink the way we live, the way we work, the way we play, and cities as a whole. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity for designers going forward, a great challenge that I know that we can embrace. Thank you.
Wow. Hossein, please.
Hi, well, thank you, William and Lynn for those great presentations, and thank you, Louis, for organizing this. Yeah, I'm Hossein Rezai. I'm a founding director of Web Structures here in Singapore, around 10:30 p.m. at night, so I'm trying to keep myself awake. And now Web is part of Ramble, a much larger organization with some 15,000 people. You know, we're 200 offices across the world, so we have sort of a global reach. My 6 minutes introduction or provocation goes as such that what exactly happens in the post-COVID era is really unknown. We're still in the middle of it. There may be major shifts in the way we live, work, and design, but we do not really know for sure what these major changes are going to be. As of now, the most prevalent shift appears to be in the way we work, as William and Lynn also alluded to. In where we work from home, for example. I'm not convinced that this will indeed end up being the biggest change COVID brings us. I hope it isn't, because I do not think this is a big enough a change. We need much bigger changes to the way we conducted ourselves on this planet before COVID. Millions of us, for years, I'm sure the four of us who are on this panel at the moment, you know, millions of us for years have been working from wherever we've been, from airports, on planes, from other people's offices, from parks, and from home. as well. So I don't think this work from home thing, or work away from the office, is big enough a change for COVID. What I hope from a sort of behavioral change in the design industry, where we are practitioners of in different capacities in architecture and engineering, and other participants in the built environment, for that behavioral change, I have some hopes, some fears, and some aspirations. My hope is that we move away from a monocentric approach to design. And what I mean by that is a client-centric approach to design, a people-centric approach to design, a cost-centric approach to design, and move away from that to a multi-client based approach to design, and start thinking along the line of multiplicity of clients in our design. Now, what multiplicity of clients is, I share with you my thoughts on this with the help of these few slides that I have. Next, please. One of my favorite projects of all time, Pompidou Center by Piano Rogers, in Paris. You know, for every project, we obviously have a paying client. Next, please, who comes to us with a site, with a brief, and hopefully with some money to pay us and to pay others to bring the project to life. So there is a site, we have a client, we have contractual obligations towards the client, we have a duty of care to enable him to achieve whatever aspirations he has. If you take a project on and the client's aspiration is to maximize profit, if you've taken the project, we have a contractual duty to help him achieve that. There's nothing wrong with that. What is wrong is when we stop that and we say that we are a client-centric organization and we start designing the project. What I think we should consider that there are other clients to whom we have equal duty of care to. In this case, I think the streets around the sites are our clients. We should ensure that the streets around the sites that we design are going to be enriched by the design that we do, and there are better streets after our design is implemented than there were before. Next. I think that the neighborhood is our client. We should consider that people around the site as our clients. We have a duty of care to ensure that when they cycle past the site or walk past the site with their family, with their kids, that they say, yes, this neighborhood is a better place with this building there than it was before this building. We have a duty of care to them to ensure that that is achieved. Next. The grid of the city is our client. If we have the opportunity to correct it, if there is a breakage in it and we can enhance it, we should do that. We have that duty of care. Next, please. The whole city is our client. You know, there are projects that brings and puts a city back on the map. It enlivens the city, and we should consider that in our designs. Next. The whole country is our client. You know, the projects that happen, and suddenly you realize that, yes, this country, as it was said about Sydney and Sydney Opera House ages ago, that yes, we've gone past people who are concerned about food and procreation. We now care about other things. You know, that whole country is our client. Next. The whole planet is our client. We have to pay as much attention to the needs of the planet as we do to those of the paying clients, and issues to do with climate change, global warming, etc., will then be addressed if we have that psyche, if we have that approach to our projects. Now, if you think that is sort of emotive, wait for this one, from the planet all the way down to these trees. Next, please. Which are on our site or around our site. These guys are our clients. We have to treat them with the same level of rigor as we do the paying clients' needs, Next. A couple of birds who have nests on these trees are our clients. When we talk about biodiversity, this is sort of what we mean. And yes, from the planet all the way down to this ladybird who, as a bug, lives around the site or on the site, is our client. So I think now every project has multiplicity of clients, and there are at least 10. These are the 10. Whatever design discipline we are in, of course, I'm using an architectural example, but even as engineers, we still have multiple clients as other people. So I hope that we move in this direction away from the monocentric approach to our design. And one for the engineers, and I'm fundamentally an engineer, so I should have one for us. So next one. From an engineering design point of view, next slide, please. Next, please. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that image of the crowd, please. Yeah. I'm sorry about the quality of this this image. This is an image that I had in one of the I shared from others. Copyright of it is not mine, but I had an article written about 15 years ago, and this image was in it. This is the live load for which we design our office buildings. This is 250 kilograms per square meters, 2.5 kilonewton per meter square. And that is what the codes tell us we should design our office, open plan offices for. Clients, I'm sure William is very, very, very aware of it, got into a race together starting in the 80s, saying that 2.5 is not enough. I want 300 kilograms per cubic meter. The other said, no, mine has got 250, 400. 500, we've designed office floors for 500 kilograms per square meters, and this is 250. There's no way you can get those loads in it. It's highly wasteful. Now, if it is true that we're not going to have everybody in the office and that people are going to work from elsewhere, then the direct effect of that could be that our offices will never be loaded to these extents. The loading is lighter, the demand on the structure is lighter, the material usage will be less, the carbon footprint will go down, columns will be smaller, spans will get bigger, buildings are going to look different. If indeed we follow these things through, the demand on the vertical transportation becomes less, the lifts become smaller or fewer, because there is no such thing as a peak hour anymore. Not everybody turns up at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, and not everybody wants to leave at 6. Our buildings are going to look different. By extension, our roads are going to look different because we won't have a rush hour. We don't need the demand for such wide roads, and the entire infrastructure and everything is going to be different and smaller and leaner if we follow through. My fear is that we may not, because we tend to have some sort of a short memory as human beings, and that is one of our assets and one of our liabilities. I stop here with my provocation for now.
Thank you. Very interesting and different approaches, and there's some comments. I have a few questions, and I might just ask in the order that you presented. And one is, William, when you talk about these relations, as the whole thing is about your human relations and how to, then I think a lot of our attendees for this, or like people listening today and be part of it, would ask themselves, what does it mean for spaces and, let's say, architecture? It doesn't matter if it's landscape, urbanism, or architecture, or even engineering, but what does it entails? You have been a kind of a key in your team, a key factor on the South Bank project in London that's been so successful. And what was it that was different in that project regarding relations and people, and maybe also just thinking in the COVID situation, that was a differentiator compared to the other projects?
Okay, well, so the South Bank Centre, I'll just be honest, one of our directors, Jude Kelly, was the creative director, and not a project that I was personally involved with, but I think that that it's about where our focus lies. And I think if you think of the way that cities used to come about, or settlements used to come about, somebody went somewhere, to do something, and they built the buildings around them to help them do it. And then developers came along and they went, oh, I'm going to build some buildings and I'm going to go and find some people to do something in it. And I think we have to just rethink where that focus lies. And I thought Hossein's talk was great. I absolutely agree with you that we need a multiplicity of clients. And it's interesting. I'm on a project in Ireland at the moment, talking to one of the world's big banks involved in this project. And they said, yeah, even in the last 6 months, the conversations about the importance of ESG have just catapulted, gone forward so much, which is great. But my criticism of your slide of the multiplicity of clients is that for me, the one single most important client who wasn't on that slide was the user, was the person who goes in it and uses that space and enjoys it and who it's really, really for. But you covered that in your live loads. I just thought it was amazing that we would look at, I've spent so many meetings in office meetings where people would talk about the limit on the number of people on the office floor was about the number of toilets, right? So we're actually designing office floors around how much, I won't swear, stuff people create on a day-to-day basis rather than the product of them as humans, right? So I think the reason why I kind of have a love-hate relationship with architecture and developers is sometimes I think we lost 3,000 years of learning on making cities. And in the last 70 years, we just screwed it all up massively. So I think going back to the South Bank Centre, I think what is extraordinary about what happened at the South Bank is that actually the refurbishment, so 20 years ago, 4 million people a year went to the South Bank Centre. And for people who don't know, it's in the centre of London. It's where the Festival of Britain was in the 1950s. And it has a concert hall and it has a great theatre, classic brutalist. You know, it's the National Theatre by Dennis Lasden. It's regularly on the top of most hated buildings in the UK and most loved buildings. It's, you know, it's one of those fabulous brutalist structures. And actually the transformation that happened in the South Bank was not about the buildings. That was very light touch. It was about culture, and I don't mean culture big C, because opera and music was happening there. It was about small c culture. It was about connecting with communities, listening to communities, bringing in small things that made a difference to people's lives, about, you know, knitting circles and busking groups and disabled, you know, bringing in disabled groups or different diverse organizations for people just to be together and watch. And some people just walk along the South Bank and watch each other. And I think the thing that we try to do in all of the work we do, which is why I'm really worried when we just talk about design, is try to inhabit places at the very earliest stage of a project. So before any sort of, it's not about the buildings, it's about the people in between the buildings, the people who make cities, it's the people who make businesses, it's the people who make all of the things we're talking about. And it's just trying to put ourselves in their shoes. And one of the things we often say on projects we work on is that everybody is an expert in place, right? We are all experts in place. I'm not an expert in engineering. I'm not an expert in architecture centers. We are all experts in place. And just thinking about putting ourselves into other people's shoes and walking in them and thinking about how we want those spaces to behave.
Okay, I just write this. I like your last one, expert in places. Yeah. So, but then I was really intrigued, Lynn, when you talk about small cities or not small cities. You talk about cities that are not super metropoles, even though Chicago is a super metropole. But like you're saying that if business travel is 20% down, and we know from the other McKinsey that people are working from home. That the shopping is also changing a lot. So, but what are we having more of? What is the counterpart of that? What is like the other side of that coin? So what is the more and not the less?
I think the more is going to be is urban spaces are, you know, more increasingly important, so that we're looking at, you know, what's the ratio of parks to individuals. Because if we're all really going to be in a localized neighborhood, that, you know, just think about COVID. I'm sure all of you, when I look at the, you know, my colleagues here on the screen, I'm sure all of you inhabited your public spaces, like your parks, far more, because that was the one place you could go. So I think the quality of landscape design is going to go up, and the importance of it in being able to really inhabit and socialize in those public spaces. I think we're going to find what the new uses of retail are in terms of the experience economy. You know, they're now talking about, you know, retail will be there, and we see a lot of the online stores having bricks and mortar, but they're really about the experience of how to do it. And so we're going to see that trend. And I'm reading some of the studies that look pretty interesting. It's really the socialization aspect of retail as much as it's about the purchasing aspect of retail.
So just to continue with, if I say, I just say design excellence, then in that kind of context you're talking about, it's like it's really a broad, let's say, offering you need to be able to deliver on.
Well, I think we really have to rethink about the experience design. I mean, right now we think so much about almost going to what William was saying about everybody is an expert in place. I think that it goes beyond buildings, that, you know, designers have an ability to look at things differently. And so it's the experience of experiencing your world, so that we really have a chance to rethink about the way the city is. I mean, if we're designing everything from, if we're designing a building differently, that it's going to have multiple lives, what a great challenge. We're thinking beyond this one client, like Hossein was saying. We're not thinking about just the client of today. We're thinking about the 5 lives that this building is going to have, because of course, to have a sustainable planet, we don't want to tear buildings down. So we as designers have to start thinking about what's the future life of this building, and convince clients that they have to think far beyond their 10-year span. So that's an opportunity for us to rethink differently. When we think about retail, I mean, it's really thinking about not just the bricks and mortar, but how are we bringing in technology, AI, to make it more of an experience for the consumer, so that there is a success factor for the retail, but it's also about how do we experience that space in a very different way. So I think we have to think about, you know, what is the designed environment? And that designed environment has now gone beyond the bricks and mortar of a building.
Yeah, I'm not sure we got it all infused in architecture school, but then we have to make up for it somehow in our profession, because it's in architecture school it was much more the kind of the formal design that kind of ruled the at least at my time in school. But I was just thinking, just moving to Hossein here, when you talk about the responsibility as designers, if you turn it around, if you say what is the responsibility of the clients, and you know what I'm trying to get into is like what would be reasonable to ask. And when I'm saying this is that most of our investors today is kind of pension funds. It's not a person anymore. It's an organization. It's everybody's money basically that's invested into a future. Maybe the buildings are used for a school or something else. It's rented out or leased out for many years. But what is the responsibility from a client side towards this? Maybe not to us as designers or working in the construction or building industry, but to the bigger goods. What is that, in your opinion?
Yeah, that, you know, that's a good question, and perhaps the topic of another webinar. We're talking about designers and their responsibilities, and sort of a bit of self-reflection within our profession. I would say that multiplicity of clientele approach, that shift in our thinking process, where we put others at the center of our work, should be everybody's business. Yes, I think the developer should worry about, should respect the rights of the bug who lives on the site. I mean, I know it sounds a bit emotive, but I think these things are practical and possible when we talk about biodiversity. I think that the developer, the client, whether it's a pension fund or an individual, must care about the planet and what his project and his development and his aspirations do to the planet, and whether they are aligned with the future that we all have in mind for the planet. So, you know, we should all remove the myopic view that we have our role, our responsibilities, and our application of our expertise to our projects and to our day-to-day life. Developers must do the same. They should also say that my intentions are to develop this particular office building in here in order to get return on investment to my shareholders and to my company. Fine, I have no problem with that. But at the same time, there are other interests of other beings and other entities that I must respect just as much as I respect the interests of myself and my shareholders, and that is the neighbors, the city, the ladybird, and the tree, and the birds. I think that is the approach that they should all have. Now, quite a lot of these things are being legislated now. The policies. There are certain things that we could do. I'm old enough to be in there in the late 70s and early 80s. There are things that we could do then that we are not allowed to do now because it is illegal for us to do some of the things that we used to do before. So developers are bound by that as well. So it applies to everybody. And I suppose
I just want to agree with you. So I think it is absolutely true. We do have this, this group responsibility, and I think that what I was trying to say in the piece about what's that? Oh, but I was saying the same thing about value. Is we have to work out what we value. And although I think you can lay reasonable amounts of blame at Milton Friedman's feet to say that the market is everything, and actually it's about all you have to do is give value back to the shareholders. But it's part of why we have to decide whether capitalism or the current economic model suits the future of this planet, and we have to say what do we want, what do we value, what is important. And I think that although it's really tricky, we have as customers have a responsibility to demand different standards, and we have to be willing to pay a little bit more for things that are environmentally friendly. We have to boycott brands that don't do what we think is right, and we have to collectively move in the right direction.
I have a question to all of you, because you didn't really touch on it, any of you, in some ways. And I'm just curious to hear your take on it. It seems that it's you take the precondition that it all happens in cities, rather either it's a metropole or small city, or it's like one of the big cities like Chicago. But is there a demographic situation here where people would migrate into the countryside, and we get a New York situation like in the 70s, or again, or things that, are we sure that the life on the countryside, growing vegetables? I'm thinking myself, I've spent 7 months in gardening now, which I've never done before. But are you sure that or are you? What's your take on that? Isn't there something happening with all these young families who wants to move out, live together, and it's like in a co-op together with somebody else, and maybe go to the city once in a while? What is that? Please.
I think it's going to be, we all know in our lives, so many people have moved to their summer homes, their vacation homes during the pandemic. And quite frankly, it's going to be interesting to see how many people come back. And there's, I know there are a number of people who are selling their residences in the city. I'm convinced that cities are here to stay and that people are going to return. It's a more dynamic environment. I think they're going to get bored in their, summer house and with the, in the woods, and they're going to want the environment of the city. But I think it's an interesting transition.
I'll declare, I felt a bit bad saying, we were talking about the city. I moved into the countryside like 5 years ago. I'm living in deepest rural West Sussex. If I look out of my window, I just see fields. And we've lost Louis. Have we lost the host of the webinar? Is that it?
This is great. We're just going to control it, guys.
We can do whatever we like. We can talk about whatever we like.
Okay. Louis Becker. So I live in the countryside already, and I think a lot of it is, look, there's a little bit about life stage living, right? There are people who want to be in the city. I lived in the centre of London in my 20s, and then I moved a little bit further out in my 30s when I had kids, and then I went out again. And it's also I can, right? I'm privileged enough to be able to travel in, and actually I have control over my travel. And I think that there are lots of people who don't necessarily have that opportunity. However, yes, I think people are going to move out and recognize that they have the flexibility to do that. People can commute a little bit further. They can, if they can, work from home. And we need to, if we start disaggregating businesses into the countryside where people choose a better way of life, then they will be able to work in different places. But I fundamentally believe the city is absolutely not dead. And so, in 1666, London had a great fire, and the great fire finished off the plague, right? So it wasn't just a fire, they had a plague and then a fire. And the city still, and Christopher Wren designed a huge plan for the city of London, and he didn't have a chance to build it because everybody else came in and did it. Chicago had a great fire, and it turned Chicago from a kind of a one-horse cattle town into the city that it is now. It was the catalyst for the creation of modern Chicago, that the extraordinary city that it is. And I think it comes back to that idea about beneficial forest fires. That the city will need to attract people back again, and people come back for parties, and they'll come back for creative brainstorms and jobs and excitement, and to pop off with people. I mean, I think if I missed a weekend in my 20s, I would have gone mad, right? So, but a year, I mean, I think we're about to enter the roaring 20s, and I think people are going to be heading back into the cities in their droves.
I definitely tend to agree with both Lynn and William. Definitely, cities are not about to disappear, and definitely not because of COVID. No, even now, looking at our behaviors, the way we have behaved in the face of COVID, you had beautiful words, William, about inclusion, about democracy, about this. None of those things are happening now. Look at the way we have distributed the COVID vaccination. 80% of the vaccination has happened in 10 countries. As a country with 30 million people was ordered 80 million vaccine. We are continuously having the same, quite a lot of us, not all of us, of course, the same greed-based, personal-based, person-based approach to everything we do. So I don't think COVID is going to be that big shift. What it is going to do, like many other pandemics of its nature, is it's sort of expediting some of the things that, accelerating some of the things that were going to happen anyway. William and some other people like William would move towards the countries. They would move a bit faster, those who would be doing that. Others would be doing exactly whatever they were doing, but faster. And my last point would be on this thing about Industry 4. Just to link it back to that. What is happening is the sort of thing that I was advocating, multiplicity of clients. And we are all practitioners. We know it's tough enough to meet the demands of one client, the paying client, let alone creating 9 other clients for ourselves to care for. We can only do that if we harness the power of Industry 4, of AI, of computational design. And it is only with that we can do that. And it's only with that we can live wherever we live, work wherever we live, but still continue to be productive. We don't have to live together to live in a city. The 4 of us, the 5 of us are now technically could be in a city and communicating with one another. So technology and Industry 4 is key to the future behavior and activities that we all have.
True, but wouldn't we all like to carry on this conversation with a bottle of wine in a meal in a restaurant?
Yeah, we do that. But I have one question for short answers because we have to end soon. But just a kind of let's say a base condition. If you say, and all of you, and I tend to agree that the city is still very relevant and it will kind of reinstall itself. It might need a forest fire to kind of reformulate what it is. Then my question here to you, and you just answer very shortly, very short answers, is that something about that landscape or nature becomes more part of the city, or is this distinction of countryside and city, is that a little bit? Are we fed up with this? With the hard surface, Copenhagen or Chicago or London? Is it that, are we looking for a different public ground in these places to support what we're talking about now? Just a quick answer from all of you.
Well, I'll start with that because seeing the number of pandemic dogs that have happened in our city, there's definitely going to have to be more parks and more dog parks. So I think, though, that, you know, to be serious about it, I think there is a definite need for more green space in our cities. And I think the pandemic has really brought it about. And that's why I said I think the importance of landscape design is really very important as we look at rebuilding the city.
Yeah, look, I think we all want to be closer to nature as humans, but I think cities, you know, are exciting places and they shouldn't all just be greened over. I do think we need to avoid what I like to call the tyranny of the landscape plan, which is like nice patterns and nice planters without thinking why anybody would be there or what they're going to do when they're there. So I think as long as it's the right places, well designed, trying to create places that people want to go to, then great.
I would like to see an approach to greenery, to plants, and to other species that integrates us in the built environment with the natural environment, rather than them being brought into our cities, individual trees being removed from their families, wherever they are together, put inside a planter next to outside my window so that I look at it and I enjoy it. I like us to be able to ask them whether they want to be with us, and then integrate with them rather than get a bunch of slaves in the form of trees and birds and things just for us. Move away from that us-centric approach. That is what I would like to see, and there are very, very good and positive signs that is happening with a lot of sort of designers and practitioners.
Well, thank you. I'm just now our time is running out, but I've learned a lot from this discussion, and I'm sure that the people on the call and the talk have done the same thing. I think that at least if it's not a revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, it seems to be a big change. It seems to be a shift in mindset. And if you're representing, let's say, viewpoints in different parts of the world, but also different parts of the industry, that and the evidence of this mindset is something, then we need to react to it. And I can't help to think that when we say, and I know it's really a word that's misused so much, sustainability, but like this idea of balance somehow is important. That seems to be even more important than before, and the way we use technology, and at least as it looks right now, that this spark that comes through the pandemic to use technology to communicate in a much more freely way and a much more normal way, not exclusively, and that will reduce travel, but it will also give more connection at the same time. That's a big issue. I just want to say thank you to the three of you, and I'm really sad that Ken was not here to also enrich us with his viewpoints, but that's been extremely good, and thank you so much. And if we could sit down with a bottle of wine after this together, that would have been amazing, but we can't, and I promise we will see each other in the near future.
Chicago at the end of the year, right?
Chicago or Singapore or London, Sussex. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Lynn, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Everybody, thanks.